Thank you very much for having me. And I'll start by sharing my screen here. I have a PowerPoint presentation prepared for everyone, and I hope you enjoy it. So, going into slideshow, can everyone see my cover slide, Autism, COVID-19, and the Police? Awesome. All right. Well, thank you again for having me. My name is Tom ILand. I'm on the autism spectrum, and I'm coming to you today from Los Angeles, California, in the United States. Over here in California, I'm a certified public accountant. I have had jobs with Disney, Deloitte, several other corporate entities, but 5 years ago, I decided to leave the accounting field completely because I felt that I needed to tell my story. I had to share my experiences. I had to help people on a personal level, and I've been much happier since doing so and have accomplished a lot, and I'm really making the world a better place by not working at a desk all day. So I'm very grateful for that decision. And I found that when it comes to the autism community, a lot of young adults are having difficulty with transition, like moving out of their parents' house, getting a job, holding a job, finding a school to go to, finding what really makes their heart sing. And so my mother, Emily, and I decided to write a book together called Come to Life, Your Guide to Self-Discovery. And this is a little bit of my secrets to success. And we call it Come to Life because you can't wait for life to come to you. It's up to you to come to life. And too many people are sitting back waiting for some kind of miracle instead of going after what they want and discovering their own mental and emotional strength and seeing they can be part of something bigger and greater than themselves. So my mother and I wrote this book. It's won several awards. And my mother is also fluent in Spanish. She went to the University of Madrid and learned Spanish and helps a lot of the Latino families here in California. And the book has won several international Latino book awards. And one of the judges said that this book belongs or needs to be in every secondary school and college and university around, because this is missing in a lot of people's lives if they're going to find what they want to do with their lives. And just last year, I went above and beyond in getting some opportunities to show that autism does not have to define you. It doesn't have to hold you back. And that by putting yourself onto platforms, speaking platforms like this, you can start to really resonate with a lot of people. So in the upper left-hand corner, I'm part of the Toastmasters International Organization to improve public speaking. And they have a program called the Accredited Speaker Program, reserved for professional speakers that master the art of public speaking and apply it to their particular trade. And last year, I became the first Toastmasters accredited speaker with autism in the world, because we see autism as a social communication disorder, and public speaking is essentially socializing and communicating. And I have really broken the barriers and mastered both my diagnosis and the art of public speaking so I can help people. I'm also a TEDx speaker. If anybody likes TED Talks or TEDx Talks, you can find my talk called How to Come to Life. How to Come to Life is my TEDx talk, if you want to search for that on YouTube. I'm also a speaker I've gone to the United Nations twice this past year. I went on World Autism Awareness Day to talk about my interactions with the police, and that's what I'm going to go into in great detail today. And I also went back in December for the International Day of Persons with Disabilities to discuss why people with disabilities need to be hired for work, seeing their strengths while also addressing opportunities for improvement in order to help the UN meet their sustainable development goals. So that's a little bit of what I did just last year alone. And this year, I'm a member of Junior Chamber International, JCI, that's Junior Chamber International, a humanitarian organization that has young people aged 21 to 40 making a difference in humanity, putting service before self. And the California JCs, we call ourselves JCs. The California JCs saw the work that I do and nominated me for what's called a TOYA Award, 10 Outstanding Young Americans. And past recipients of this award have been presidents, politicians, entertainers, humanitarians. And I just found out recently that I'm going to receive this award in October, 10 Outstanding Young Americans. And you'll notice the trophy there, the two hands meeting one another. The symbolism of that is the hope of mankind lies in the hands of youth and action. We need to build our future and make the world a better place. So that's a little something I'll be receiving in the near future. But getting to today's subjects, what we're here to talk about, autism, the police, race, COVID. I've had the chance to talk to a couple of organizations in the past, even before Black Lives Matter really came to light. And so I've had the chance to speak to these organizations, and my most recent was with the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona. It's a state right over here by California. This talk had to do with beyond the talk, because I am aware of the talk that Black families have with their children when it comes to police interaction. And my parents had to have their own talk with me about interacting with the police, which brings me to my next slide here. But I'm going to be discussing these particular bullet points. We're going to talk about telling your child about his or her diagnosis. And in the case of police interaction, it could mean the difference between life and death, as you'll see in a moment. I'm going to talk about why train the police and train people with autism are needed. Both parties need to be aware of what to expect from the other. Also, I'll talk about what we can do as a community and as a society to keep each other safe and empowered so that we can all be alive when all is said and done. And I want to make a quick disclaimer here that I'm going to have some group pictures in my presentation here. These were all taken before COVID-19, so before the group events or large gatherings were prohibited, these events took place. So general disclaimer there. So let me start by saying that the conversations you're having within your household, within your family, mean a whole lot. Starting with the diagnosis. If your child has a diagnosis, you know about it and they don't, at some point you need to be able to sit them down and tell them how their diagnosis affects them. And my mother and her sister, my aunt, wrote a book here called Autism Spectrum Disorders from A to Z. And in that book, I have Tom's tips for telling, and they're based on some of my pointers or what helped me during my talk about my diagnosis. Because I'll tell you the story, what prompted the discussion. My younger brother and sister were getting calls from their friends looking to hang out after school and on the weekends. One day I asked my Mom, why doesn't the phone ever ring for me? And she had to think on her toes pretty quick. And she had to explain, rather than say, you don't have any friends or you don't know how to make friends. She told me, Tom, you're still learning how to make friends. So I was still in the learning process. So that gave me a little bit of hope. But it was the prompter for a much bigger discussion. So my parents went on to sit me down and explain what autism was. And I put the most important point I want to make at the top here. I couldn't accept that I had autism until I knew that my parents had accepted that I had autism. Because there are too many parents that are in denial, that are ashamed, or think the kid will be ashamed, or that the kid will understand. And they keep that diagnosis a secret and don't put it out in the open. And that is a huge disservice. And as we'll talk about in a moment, it could kill them if they don't know about their diagnosis or how to explain it or how to disclose it to a police officer, for example. Case in point, my mother gave me a card to explain that I have autism so I could present it with my identification if I get pulled over by a police officer, for instance. And I did get pulled over by a police officer. I see him coming. I'm at the wheel. I'm thinking, oh, that officer wants to see my ID and my card. Now, what do you think I'm reaching for right now? A gun, a weapon, something that could hurt that officer. Thankfully, that officer said, sir, please keep your hands on the steering wheel where I could see them. Had that officer felt threatened or thought he was going to be killed, he could have shot me and I may not be talking to you right now. So all too often, our young people might be doing things that could get them shot or hurt or killed. So while it is imperative that we have something describing that they have a diagnosis, they must also know when to go for it and how to go for it safely so that they don't get more hurt or dead. So my mother, in light of my diagnosis in that incident, and also being the president of the Autism Society of Los Angeles, had the Los Angeles Police Department come to her and say, we need more training on autism. Can you help us? And she said, absolutely. So she starts training the police about autism. And my mother and I have found that empathy, showing police officers how it feels to have autism, is what's going to resonate with them the most. Because they will remember, as Maya Angelou, the famous author, said, people remember how you make them feel. So when we can show the officers what it's like to have an information processing delay or a difficulty with motor skills, then they'll come up with their own solutions or answers. And it's best to use evidence-based programs. My mother's is called Experience Autism, and it is the only evidence-based police training on autism in the United States. There were doctoral candidates that studied its effectiveness on police officers, and they found it to be effective in showing that police have more competence and confidence in helping people with autism. But during the training of all these officers, my mother had an officer approach her and say, Emily, I could know that someone has autism, but if they run from me, I still have to chase them. And if they fight with me, I have to fight back and win. It's my protocol. So who is teaching the young people to not run and not fight? And the answer was nobody. But that's when my mother had the aha moment. Ladies and gentlemen, just training the police is not enough anymore. We cannot just rely on the police to be experts on everything or know what to do all the time. We have to do our part in showing our young people how to interact with the police as well. So both parties will have a better chance of understanding one another, what to expect, and have better outcomes. So my mother decided to make an entire movie called Be Safe, the Movie, to show young people how to interact with the police. This is another missing link in a lot of people's lives. We say safety first, but to tell you the truth, ladies and gentlemen, we're leaving safety to chance right now. We need to actually show young people what to do. And this movie has several scenarios. Like there's a young man with a red trolley there from a grocery store parking lot. He took it out of the lot, and the officer said, that belongs to the grocery store, take it back. Or in the upper right corner there's a gentleman who was mistaken for an armed robber, and police came out with their guns drawn, but he cooperated, complied, did what they said, and was eventually let go when they found out, oh, we have the wrong person. We have the young lady in the lower left corner getting a speeding ticket and disclosing her diagnosis safely. And in the lower right-hand corner, we have paramedics tending to a young lady who has to go to the hospital. So these scenarios that tend to come up commonly when our young people are out in the community, and you think they may know what to do, or you may think that's not going to happen to them, or there'll be a caregiver there to explain the situation. That's leaving safety to chance. We need to teach our young people what to do in these situations. And talking is not teaching. That's why video modeling, showing through scenes, movies, and establishing context and bridging those gaps of information that our young people have are key to keeping them safe. And we've had several success stories of young people remembering what they see in these movies and these scenes and being able to get home alive at the end of the day. And it can work across all levels of the spectrum, regardless of your cognitive functioning or verbal level. Even if you don't speak or have trouble speaking, you can still learn how to follow instructions. And that is what we need to do, teach our young people how to follow instructions. And my mother and I took things a step further. Again, these were taken before COVID. We're currently working on a virtual option for this. We discovered that when young people and the police are strangers, when they don't know one another, when they don't understand one another, that causes the situation to go south, go poorly. So what my mother and I do is we train officers using Experience Autism and then immediately introduce those officers to various people on the autism spectrum. And they'll get paired up, and the police will mentor the young people, take them through a series of exercises, and they'll have the opportunity to see what handcuffs feel like, in one hand in front, two hands in front, or in the back, so they can have that sensation. It can be very overwhelming having those handcuffs behind you, and it's better to have it in a safer practice environment rather than in crisis mode when everyone doesn't know what's going on. So when we have those relationships being built and those gaps being bridged, that is what makes for better outcomes. And as we look at society as a whole, nowadays we live in a see something, say something society. We're quick to involve the authorities when we see something unusual or someone behaving in a way that we think is odd or might lead to something criminal. But guess what? That could just be someone with autism being themselves. They're not drunk. They're not high on drugs. They're not mentally ill. And yes, we might want to involve the police because we fear for our own safety. But when we take a moment to think maybe there's something else going on there that could keep a person with autism out of prison even, because as we discuss in Be Safe, all too often, people with autism sing like canaries, tell everything about everything rather than remain silent and not say something that could incriminate them. So a lot of people with autism are in jail today because they didn't know when to shut up, for lack of a better term. And my aunt, Barbara Doyle, who wrote the ASD A to Z book, has a little article out there you can search on Google. It's called "And Justice for All Unless You Have Autism." And it talks a lot about how people with autism are often perceived as criminals just by how their facial expressions are, just how they behave in a courtroom or in front of a judge or a jury, or they don't look sorry or feel remorse for what's happening. And their peers see that and say, lock that guy up. So that's something we definitely need to address as a society. Now, looking at COVID-19 a little bit, one of the themes of my book, Come to Life, is to be the hero in your life. And I'm a big fan of Batman, so I kind of picture to myself, what would Batman do in this situation? He'd find a way to rise to the challenge. He'd find a way to be his better self. He would not take no for an answer. He would bounce back from a failure. So that's kind of the philosophy I live by, and how I'm getting through COVID is to be heroic, be that light that people are desperately looking for. And I want to say that I think people with disabilities have a slight advantage during this pandemic because they have had years of social isolation, feeling that anxiety, that unpredictability that we feel right now. And in a sense, I feel I've prepared my entire 36-year life for this moment because I can make my own fun at home. I like hanging out with people outside the house every now and then, but I'm quite all right playing with my dog at home. And I think my dog likes having me at home more too. But I think people with disabilities need to be consulted with and not overlooked because they have the answers. They are also human beings and they also need to be cared for during this pandemic. And by sharing our experiences online, even though we're more physically distant from one another, we're not meeting in person in groups, we are still more tightly knit and closely connected than ever through events like this. I would not be having this event right now or connecting with people in other countries if it weren't for this pandemic. So by sharing my story, my experiences, what gets me through difficult times, other people want to hear that. And other people want to hear your story and your secrets too. So by putting that out there for the world to see and hear can really make a difference. So as I start to wrap up here, even though we're not meeting in person, it is still very possible to create relationships, long-lasting, fruitful relationships, so that we can all understand one another better and not only survive, but thrive in this pandemic. And I'll leave you with some quotes here. One's from my favorite author, Jack Canfield. If anyone's read The Success Principles or the Chicken Soup for the Soul book, I've been to his events, and he says, nothing will change for the better until you do. Think about what you can do to be a better person, to help others in need, to make a difference in the world, to make it a better place. And you'll soon find that you're helping others, and it feels good to commit a random act of kindness or to share your story and help others that are struggling. At least it makes me feel good anyway. And I want to reemphasize why Come to Life matters. And it was written before this pandemic, and the brand continues with me. I want to remind you again that life doesn't come to you. It's up to you to come to life. Even if you can't go outside, you can still make a difference right from where you are. And we're going to get through this pandemic. So here's my summary here. So again, we talked about telling your child about their diagnosis and why you should do so, why both police and people with autism need education about one another, and what we can do as a society and a community to stay safe and empowered. I want to thank you all very much for your attention. I'll be around for questions at the end of this session. Back to you, Venessa.